Keep watching the story and follow Mr. Marcus Stories for more powerful moments.
Denver smelled like cold rain and diesel that morning, the kind of smell that clings to a man's collar or long after he's gone inside. Jonah Hale stood at the loading dock of the Sterling Vance Tower on Blake Street at exactly 6:52 a.m., wearing a gray coverall 2 sizes too big and a name badge that read J. HLA Faculties. He had shaved off the beard he'd worn for 3 years. He had traded his Patek Philippe for a $19.99 drugstore watch. Nobody, he who passed him that morning, would have guessed he was worth $2-3 billion. That was the point. 61 days earlier, his mother, Eleanor Vance, had sat across from him in her glass-walled office on the 40th floor and told him something he never expected to hear. "You've never worked a single day you couldn't quit," she said. "I built this company from a 2-room print shop on Colfax Avenue, and I will not hand it to a man who has never once been ignored." Jonah had laughed at first. Then he saw her face. She wasn't joking, and she wasn't negotiating. So he became nobody. For 4 months, he would work the loading dock and the maintenance floor of his own family's headquarters, unpaid, unrecognized, answering to a shift supervisor named Pete, who had no idea the kid hauling pallets was the man whose name was on the building's deed. Eleanor gave him one rule: no phone calls to the 40th floor, no credit cards with his real name, no explanations ever if someone treated him like less than nothing. First week taught things business school never had. A junior accountant named Craig Doyle shoved a stack of wet cardboard into his arms at 7:14 a.m. and said, "Resix around a back genius," without ever looking at his face. A woman from Siegel stepped over a spilled sup cup. Jonah was in the middle of cleaning and muttered, "You clearly weren't cut out for anything else." Nobody was cruel in a way they'd ever admit to later. They just careless, the way people are careless with things they've decided don't matter. And then there was Brooke Sinclair. Brooke ran regional marketing for Sterling Vance, 31 years old, always in a blazer that cost more than Jonah's entire monthly maintenance paycheck. She had a habit of snapping her fingers at service staff instead of using their names. And on Jonah's 4th day, she did it to him in front of 6 people waiting for the elevator. "You move the cart. Some of us have a 9 a.m. He moved the cart. He said nothing, but he noticed the way you notice a splinter, you'll have to deal with eventually, that Brooke never once apologized for anything, not even when she was wrong. She simply explained why she'd been right to be short with someone. She called it maintaining standards. Everyone else called it being Brooke. It would have been an ordinary miserable month if not for what happened on a Tuesday in October at 12:41 p.m. in the break room on the 2nd floor. Jonah hadn't eaten. He'd been moving furniture since 5 that morning, and there hadn't been a break long enough to get to a vending machine, let alone real food. He sat in the corner of the break room, with his hands amply swollen, with his handshell folded away the way his stomach had started to hurt, wait to avoid the nation see through the doors of my microwave and the fridge door. "You haven't eaten today, have you?" It wasn't really a question. He looked up and found a woman standing over him, holding as her half a sandwich out like it was the most natural thing in the world. She had dark hair pulled back in a loose knot, tired eyes that were kind anyway, and a Sterling Vance badge clipped to a cardigan that had clearly been men washed 100 times. Her name badge said Grace Mercer, reception. "How'd you know?" Jonah asked. "You'd be surprised. What's people notice when they're not too busy to look?" She sat down next to him, not across from him, and split what was left of her lunch in 2. "I'm Grace." "Jonah?" "Well, Jonah, eat." He would replay that sentence for weeks afterward. The plainness of it, the fact that she hadn't asked him a single question about his life before deciding he was worth half her sandwich. He'd been surrounded by people his entire life who wanted something from him the second they learned his last name. Grace didn't know his last name. She didn't want to know it. She just thought a man shouldn't go hungry on her watch. And that was reason enough. From that day, small things started. He had Hey, Grace waved at him across the lobby, even as she was rushing to a meeting with 3 different departments waiting on her. She learned that he took his coffee black, no sugars, and started leaving a cup by the lawn dock without ever mentioning it. She thanked the janitorial staff by name, held the elevator for strangers, and never once acted like she was better than the people who scrubbed the floor she walked on. Jonah noticed that Grace treated the CEO's assistant and the man who emptied the trash can with the exact same warmth, which told him more about her character than any performance review ever could. One evening in November, at 8:52 p.m., long after the building had emptied it out, Jonah saw Grace loading grocery bags into a Honda Civic with 214 miles on it and a passenger door that didn't quite close right. He offered to help. She let him, though not without arguing first. And as they packed the trunk, he noticed a paper bag full of prescriptions bottles wedged between the groceries. "Somebody sick?" he asked. "My grandmother." Her voice softened in a way that made something in his chest ache. "She raised me after my parents died in a car accident on I-70 when I was 9. Now she's got congestive heart failure, and Medicare only covers about 60% of what she actually needs." She laughed, but it wasn't really a laugh. "So I do reception here during the day, and I tutor kids on Zoom 3 nights a week. It's fine. We manage." Jonah didn't say anything for a long moment. He was thinking about the fact that he could write a check right now in this parking lot that would cover a year of her grandmother's care without denting his monthly interest income. And he could not do it. Not without destroying the one honest thing that had happened to him in months. So instead, he just said, "That sounds hard," and meant it more than he'd meant almost anything in his adult life. He was falling for her. He knew it, the way you know a storm is coming before the sky changes color. A low pressure behind his ribs that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with the fact that a woman who believed he had nothing had decided he was still worth kindness. Yet, Brooke Sinclair noticed the shift too, though she read it differently. At first, she'd found the quiet maintenance man mildly amusing, a joke to make with her lunch friends. But somewhere around week 6, she started noticing that he never chased her the way other men did, and that irritated her more than she wanted to admit. Brooke was used to being wanted. So one Thursday, she cornered the supply closet on the 3rd floor and said with the particular confidence of someone who has never, once considered rejection a real possibility. Most people in your position would be a little more grateful when someone like me pays attention to them. Jonah just handed her the toner cartridge she'd asked for and said, "I appreciate it, Ms. Sinclair," in a voice so level she couldn't tell if it was respect or the exact opposite. By December, Grace had started pulling away, and Jonah couldn't understand why. Their lunches got shorter. Her smiles at the loading dock got thinner. He finally caught her by the elevator's bank at Wednesday and asked her directly what he'd done wrong. "Nothing," she said, not meeting his eyes. "Grace," she exhaled slowly. "Brooke's been telling people you two are together, bringing you coffee, sitting with you at lunch, telling the whole floor you're basically a couple." She forced a smile that didn't reach anywhere close to her eyes. "You deserve someone who can actually give you things, Jonah. Someone successful. I don't want to get in the way of that." He almost laughed at the absurdity of it. A woman he'd give up every dollar he owned for. Worried she wasn't successful enough for a man in a $50 maintenance uniform. But he couldn't explain the joke without breaking the one rule his mother had given him, so he just said quietly, "There's nothing between me and Brooke Sinclair. There never has been." And for a second, just a second, he thought he saw hope flicker back into her eyes before she pushed it back down and walked away. 2 weeks later, Jonah overheard something that changed the shape of everything. He was ladder. Paced the 3rd-floor conference room at 6:28 text. Date p.m. when he heard Brooke's voice through the half-open door, laughing into her phone. "Girl, trust me. Once I lock this down, I am never working another Tuesday in my life. Have you seen the Vance family's real estate portfolio? I looked it up. 12 properties. 12. She laughed again, sharp and delighted. I don't even care that he's quiet. Quiet is easy to deal with once you've got the ring. Jonah stood very still in the hallway, the ladder cold under his palm, and felt something in him go quiet and cold in a different way than she meant. It wasn't rage. It was worse than rage. It was the specific hollow disappointment of watching someone confirm exactly what you'd suspected about them the whole time. Brooke didn't want him. She wanted what she thought he represented, and she had built an entire fantasy out of a rumor and a last name she'd fished out of a company database she had no business accessing. He didn't confront her that night. He had learned, over 4 months of silence, that some people exposed themselves eventually, without any help at all. 3 days later, a rumor tore through the building like a grease fire. Someone, nobody would admit who, had sent an anonymous email to 40 employees with a blurry photograph attached. Jonah, standing in Eleanor Vance's office, being embraced by the CEO herself. The subject line read simply, "The maintenance guy isn't who you think he is." By 10:47 a.m., the entire building was buzzing. Some people guessed he was Eleanor's nephew. Others thought it had to be some elaborate prash that's he job guest direct spunkendersen. Ash stinks ad radio researchers catchy nose, chanker, dak ship a photographers on her cracked full phone screen with her stomach dropping through the floor. Grace found him at the loading dock that afternoon, her voice shaking. Is it true? Jonah set down the box he was carrying. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he told her everything. His mother's challenge the 4 months says the name Vance instead of Hale on every legal document that mattered. The 2-room print shop his mother had built into a $3 billion company. He told her he hadn't lied to hurt her. He'd stayed silent because, for the first time in his life, someone had liked him for exactly nothing at all. Grace didn't say anything for almost a full minute. Then she asked the only question that mattered to her. Would you have told me eventually, or would I have found out from an anonymous email like everybody else? I don't know, he admitted, because it was the truth. And she deserved the truth even when it wasn't flattering. She left without another word, and Jonah stood alone on the dock as the December wind cut through his thin coveralls, wondering if he'd just lost the only real thing 4 months of humiliation had earned him. Mechanics. Eleanor Vance called in Meccano staff meeting for 2 p.m. in the 40th floor auditorium. Rumors about the reason multiplied by the hour. Layoffs, a merger, a scandal. Brooke sat in the second row, still clinging to the fantasy that whatever was about to happen would somehow end in her favor. She had, after all, known first. At 2:03 p.m., Eleanor Vance walked onto the small stage in a charcoal suit, her presence immediately silencing 300 employees. For 31 years, she began, I've built this company on one belief. That character reveals itself fastest in the people nobody thinks are watching them. 4 months ago, I put that belief to the test. She looked toward the back door. Jonah, would you join me? The doors opened, and Jonah Hale Vance walked in wearing a Navy suit instead of coveralls, his real name projected in 6-foot letters on the screen behind him. Haste. The gasp that went through the auditorium was audible. A single collective intake of breath followed by a wave of murmurs that Eleanor let run its course before raising a hand for silence. This is my son, she said, the next chief executive officer of Sterling Vance Holdings. For 4 he months this building's loading dock with no title, no salary, and no protection. I asked him to find out who this company really is when the people in it think no one important is watching. She turned a page in the folder she was holding. Some of you demonstrated exactly the kind of integrity I hoped to find. Her eyes moved through the crowd, and some of you did not. She read 3 names. A DACA supervisor named Pete Alvarez, who once treated Jonah as less than a full person and who was promoted on the spot to director of facilities operations with a salary that made him sit down in his chair. A janitor named Dolores Whitbashmore, 34 years with the city, who received a standing audit season and a retirement package that had honored Smarty the Night's ticket sing shift. Her arthritis had been begging her to quit, and Grace Mercer, called up from the back row with trembling hands, praised publicly for treating every person in that building, the CEO's son included, though she hadn't known it, with the same unwavering respect. Then Eleanor's tone shifted, and the room went cold. There's also the matter of confidential information that was accessed without authorizations and leaked to this staff in an attempt to manipulate a personal outcome. I've just found Brooks Sinclair in the second row. Monsieur Sinclair. Brooks' face drained of color. You were given 4 months to demonstrate exactly the standards you claim to protect. Instead, you accessed private HR records without clearance, spread information you knew was confidential, and attempted to manufacture a relationship for personal gain. Eleanor's voice never rose. It didn't need to. Your employment with Sterling Vance is terminated, effective immediately. Brooke didn't cry. She didn't apologize either. She stood, straightened her blazer, and said, loud enough for the front 3 rows to hear, I did what any ambitious person in this company would do. Somebody needed to actually notice what was going on around here. She walked out with her chin lifted still, even now, convinced that the rules simply hadn't been fair to her. Nobody who knew Brooke was surprised. She had never once, in 4 months, I said the words, I was wrong, and she wasn't about to start on the worst day of her career. Jonah didn't watch her leave. He was looking at Grace, standing frozen at the front of the room in her cardigan, and her cracked phone still clutched in one hand, staring at him like she was seeing him for the first time, and the 203rd time at once. Hank, I need everyone to know something, Jonah said, stepping to the microphone before his mother could dismiss the room. For 4 months, one person in this building made me feel like a human being instead of a job title. She shared her lunch with me when I hadn't eaten. She drove 42 minutes out of her way every night to take care of her grandmother, without once complaining to me about it. She never asked what I could do for her, because it never once occurred to her to ask. His voice caught slightly. Grace, I should have told you the truth a long time ago. In front of everyone. Because I don't ever want you to wonder again whether what happened between us was real. It was the realest thing that's happened to me in years. The room, 300 strangers and colleagues, broke into applause before Grace had even said a word. She crossed the stage in a blur, and when she reached him, she didn't ask about the money, or the 12 properties, or the last name on the building's deed. She just said, you still eat your sandwiches too fast. And he laughed, and for a moment, neither of them cared that half the company was watching them cry. The months that followed reshaped Sterling Vance in ways that outlasted the gossip. Eleanor instituted a mandatory 8-hour ground floor rotation for every incoming executive, a policy the business press nicknamed the Vance Test, after 3 other Denver companies quietly copied it within the year. Pete Alvarez used his new director's salary to put his daughter through nursery school at Metro State. Grace's grandmother, now covered under Sterling Vance's expanded family care benefits, a policy Jonah pushed personally, once moved into a small assisted living apartment. The one Jonah had insisted on buying only after Grace made a promise it would be in both their names, not just his. Brooks Sinclair, for her part, spent the better part of the anyone to anyone. Listen, that Sterling sat shack debt, lying to cover for their own mismanagement. It took a wrongful conduct finding from an outside HR investigation and a full year of failed job interviews. Nobody in Denver's marketing scene wanted the reputational risk before something in her finally cracked open. She shot up uninvited at Draughts, Haishnevaisi the following June, and ding quacks sturdy edge of gardens ceremony in the front rain, jabbing an outfit at them that had nothing designer left in it at all. I shouldn't be here, she said when Grace noticed her. It's all right, Grace said and meant it. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Brooke's voice cracked in a way none of them had ever heard from her before. It took everything to understand that being right about a policies is never the same thing as being kind to a person. I spent a year telling myself I hadn't done anything wrong. I don't believe that anymore. Grace hugged her, quick and simple, no grand speech attached to it. Brooke nodded once, turned, and left before the ceremony began, not chased away, but walking out on her own terms this time, for the first time in longer than she could remember. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the mountains and the last of the guests toward the reception tent, Grace leaned her head against Jonah's shoulder. "Do you ever think about how close we came to never happening?" she asked. "If Brooke hadn't spread that rumor, if your mother hadn't sent that email." "I think," Jonah said slowly, "that the how doesn't matter nearly as much as the fact that it happened at all." He looked out at the skyline, at the tower with his family's name etched stone across the entrance, and thought about a man in a two sizes too big coverall who used to eat lunch alone in a corner because he thought that was simply what his life had become for 4 months. You loved a man you thought had nothing. That's not something money can buy back, no matter how much of it I have. Grace smiled, and said nothing at all, because for once in her life, nothing needed to be said. Somewhere, in a small apartment across the city, a woman who used to snap her fingers at strangers was learning, slowly and without an audience this time, what it actually meant to be humble. Whether she ever fully got there is a different story. But the lesson Sterling Vance carried forward, the one printed quietly at bottom of every new employee handbook that year, never changed. Character is not what you do when the room is watching. It's what you do when you're certain, important, ever will. If this story meant something to you, take 30 seconds and tell me in the comments what you would have done in Grace's shoes. Hit like if you believe kindness should never depend on who's watching. Subscribe if you want some more stories like this one. I'll see you in next. Because this next story I'm bringing you might just hit even harder than this one did. Disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment and educational purposes only. All characters, names, businesses, and events depicted are entirely fictional and do not represent any real person, living or dead, or any actual establishment. Any resemblance to real persons, organizations, or events is purely coincidental. This content is intended to explore themes of human dignity, workplace ethics, and social justice through narrative storytelling. It does not make factual claims about any individual, company, or institution.